So let's talk about racism in America. For all the people out there who think that racism doesn't exist in the year 2020, for anyone who believes that speaking up against racism is a pointless cause or just a waste of time, and that people are just trying to be dramatic. And for those people that say, wow, well, what about white lives? Do white lives matter? Every person's life should matter no matter what your race is. But the whole point of Black Lives Matter is because a lot of times people have put a certain group of people down and they want to tell other people, hey, we matter too. And it all goes back to history in the history books. Remember the time of slavery. They were already blacks were already oppressed during that time, and it still affects the present. And for those of you who don't believe that, well, let's look at, those, I don't know what they're called. There's like these metal balls that are all lined up, right? The one over here, somebody starts it up and then it hits the next ball and tick, 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 and it ends up hitting all the way the very last ball. And then it just creates this momentum. So that's history. What has happened in the past has still affected the present. So, for example, I'm Hispanic. I'm also a minority. And where I live in my city, I want to say about 40 years ago, there used to be the KKK, very prevalent here where I live, maybe more than 40 years ago, but I did take Chicano studies at some point, and I didn't know this myself, that the KKK would harass Hispanics walking down the street after sundown, and Mexicans were afraid to be even walking outside in the streets because they were afraid that they were going to be harassed or hurt or who knows, maybe killed. And yes, it still affects me when I am around other types of races. I think about how they are affected with their race. I think about how a black person might view the world, and I'm never going to understand it completely because I'm not black. I'm not going to understand how a white person views the world because I'm not white. All I can understand is my own perspective. Being a woman, being a woman who's Hispanic, and that's called intersectionality. So that's what makes me specifically me. If I was a man and if I was black, that would be my specific intersectionality. If I was transgender, then that would be my specific worldview experience. And everything makes up my personal perspective, such as my religion, my race, my gender, my sexual identity. Anything really. My likes can even start to narrow down more my specific intersectionality. The fact that my mom went to college and had her degree, that affects me and the possibilities that I think of for my future. Hey, maybe I also will go to college for sure. And it's more likely that if your parents went to college, it's more likely that you're going to go to college, statistically speaking. So, yes, if we use all of those facts and ideas, then of course, past history definitely affects the present. And some people don't realize that because of the way that they were raised. Maybe their parents didn't really talk about racism. Maybe their parents have the belief that racism doesn't exist. And I actually dated a guy once, briefly, for like a week. And on our date, I was talking about a course that I was teaching called Sociocultural Concepts. And that course discussed a lot about research and intersectionality, racism, and everyone's different worldview and culture, how it makes up everyone's individual, unique life perspective. And this guy looked at me dead in the eyes and said, racism doesn't exist. And I'm like taken aback by it. I'm like, I cannot date you anymore. The fact that you choose to remain in that frame of thought, and I don't want to put anyone down and use derogatory or negative words to describe how I felt about people or him in that specific moment, but I definitely felt like he was lacking a lot of understanding. And instead of having the mindset of, hey, let me take in new ideas and let me hear your perspective, he was already just closed-minded and already set in his mindset that racism doesn't exist and that people are making this up, when he himself is Hispanic and darker skinned than me. And I'm just like, how can you have that mentality? And I mean, I get it. Sometimes people want to not think that there is racism, especially when they're a minority, because they don't want to live in that reality that maybe they will be looked down upon a little bit because of their race or because of their sex or their sexual preference. Maybe they don't want to live in that reality, so then they just tell themselves that it's not real, that they're just equal, just like everyone else, and racism doesn't exist. But I mean, if we look at statistics regarding the pay that women and men get, men are still having careers and getting paid more even in the same career as a woman. And it's just the way that society has become, even through history. So if we look back in the day, in the 1950s, women used to stay at home. They would clean, cook, take care of the children, and they would bear children. And the man would go to work 40 hours a week or more and provide for his wife and children. But it still affects the present. And that's what I want to start this conversation of why people feel that the past regarding slavery, racism, immigration. So, okay, there was a moment in time, I believe around the 1940s, early 1900s. Don't quote me on the exact dates, but I mean, even before then, there was a lot of immigrants that were coming to America, and America is made up of immigrants, right? That's the soul and heart of America. And when immigrants came to America, people that were already residing here, let's say people that were of European descent, perhaps they were here before the Asian, a large influx of Asian immigrants came to America. So therefore, the Asians had to assimilate. They had to assimilate to the culture that was already here. They weren't understood. Let's look at someone who's biracial, for example, too. A lot of times they don't understand where to fit. They don't know where to fit in, or they don't understand who they should side with. Let's say you get a child who's a mixture of African American and white, right? But they mostly go to a white dominant school, high school, and they start dressing more in that culture to fit into that culture. But let's say they were raised instead in a more predominantly Black neighborhood. They would identify more with maybe that culture, and dress accordingly, and even have a dialect that resembled that culture in which that child grew up in. And all of these things affect the way that people are viewed in society. So there are several times where someone's dialect affects the way that they're perceived by others. Let's take a look at presidents, for example. Presidents have a certain way of speaking. They have to have a certain way where they carry themselves to where people are going to trust them and they're going to take their word for it. I do really believe that someone's going to vote for a president who's going to be like, yo, 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 mofos, like, what up, dog, like that, or are they going to vote for someone who's more proper, right? Because, I mean, just because someone's dialect is different doesn't mean that they're ignorant or dumb. It just means that the way they grew up speaking is different, and they can be even smarter than someone who speaks like me. So it's just like so much that goes into it that I can't just say all of it now, but everything is linked in this world. We're all linked together. The past still affects the present, and the present will affect the future. So when Rosa Parks sat in the back of the bus, she affected laws to start taking into place in where segregation and racism was diminished. And even now with that man Lloyd, how he was hurt by the cop and he died. It's still affecting people wanting change now, and of course, 1,000,000% history affects the present and the future. And racism is real, and it's a problem. And if you can look at yourself in the mirror, let's say you have white skin, there is such thing as white guilt. And you can ask your best friend, hey, do you ever feel guilty about the way that minorities are treated because you are white? And sometimes they will say yes. And it's just this thing that affects everyone. I'm not saying you have to feel guilty because you're white, because that's also not right, but I just know that everyone understands that it's a real thing. It's happening. So yeah, let's start the dialogue and let's all help each other to become less ignorant and to be more understanding of everyone's perspective, and not be judgmental of other people. As I have been guilty of doing as well. I judge other people too when I don't understand their culture, their perspective. You could see a homeless person on the street and think, God, like, go get a job, you know? Why are you here begging? Just go get a job. And you're just being lazy. That's why you are homeless. But in reality, they don't want to be homeless. They would love to have their own homes too, you know? They would love to go sleep on a bed. They would love to have meals, 3 meals a day or more, just like us. But you can't. You don't know where that person came from. You don't know if they're struggling with mental health issues. You don't know if they're struggling with substance abuse. You don't know if they maybe lost their whole family a year ago and they don't know how to cope with it. You don't know if they grew up homeless and their mom abandoned them and they grew up on the streets and that's all they know. You don't know if they were sexually abused like a week ago and now they just lost it and they became an alcoholic. You don't know what that person is going through. And that's why when I see blatant racism of a man just trying to get into his own apartment complex where he lives, and then white cops start surrounding him, telling him to put his hands up and get on the floor and all this stuff, and the man keeps telling them, I live here, and the cops are like, no, we don't believe you because you're black and this is a nice apartment complex. You're gonna tell me that there's no such thing as racism? Then seriously, you should definitely open your eyes and look around you for what's really out there. And I really hope we can help each other. And even me just making this video was very difficult for me. I'm afraid to have my voice out there. I'm afraid to talk to people about situations like this, but I feel like every person can make a difference, even the smallest difference. So me even speaking up about this can make a tiny difference to something way bigger than all of us. And yeah, we'll talk soon.